Welcome to the Pig and Whiskey Test Kitchen. Today we'll be cooking jerk spiced pork. Let's get started. Okay, first off we need 1/3 cup of onion salt, 1/3 cup onion flakes, 2 tablespoons of black pepper freshly ground. Then quickly to the bowl we'll add 2 tablespoons of allspice. Up next is 2 tablespoons of red pepper flake. Then we'll add 1 heaping tablespoon of cinnamon. Okay, now we're going to grate 1/2 of a nutmeg into the bowl. Then we're going to add 1 dried habanero crushed. Do not crush it with your fingers like I did, or you'll be paying for it. Up next is 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Then we're going to add 1 bunch of thyme, stems removed. Mix that thoroughly and prepare to rub your meat. Today we have a picnic shoulder. You can tell the skin is still on and it is still in its cryovac. So we're going to open it up and get started trimming. Once you remove the packaging, be careful to dispose of any liquids properly. Then I'm going to speed up to make this process a little more bearable. I am checking the shoulder for any imperfections, any scrap pieces of meat and or skin or any kind of fatty tissue that seems out of place or may not appear to be edible. Okay, here I'm trimming the skin back from the shank, and now I am prying the muscles apart using fine cuts to separate the different muscles. The goal here is to pull the muscles back from the bone so that we might get rub down into the meat. We are not injecting, so it's crucial that we open it up as much as possible to get the rub inside to carry flavors throughout the entire shoulder. Here I'm just picking out any bits, any silver skin, or any tough pieces or excessive pieces of fat. Okay, assessing the skin. The skin looks good. It's important that we leave the skin on as we will be cooking on a drum smoker today. And drum smokers, as you know, the heat source comes from the bottom. So the skin will act as protection for the meat and keep it from burning. Okay, here I'm just analyzing the pieces of meat, how it'll go back together, figuring out my best strategy to rub the meat and pull any meat from the bone that might still be attached. Okay, once I have it trimmed and separated, I will begin to rub. As you will notice, this process does not include actual rubbing. We are just taking the rub and applying it to the surface of the meat, trying to get down into the recesses between the different muscles and alongside the bone. Once we thoroughly coat the inside, we're going to reassemble the shoulder and sprinkle on the outsides, getting good coverage. Notice I'm not terribly concerned about the bottom. The skin will not absorb much flavor. So here I'm just going to wipe a little onto the board and set the skin on it, and what attaches itself will be sufficient. Now would be a good time to secure the butt with skewers. Notice I indicated the spot where 2 skewers would go. We are not going to do that as I wish to baste the meat later on. Okay, the smoker is up to temperature. We are at 325 degrees. We are going to add our wood chunks to the fire and replace the baffles. Now we can put in the grate. And something I like to do is add a wire mesh rack before I set the meat on. If I choose to remove the meat later and it is falling apart, the rack will assist in removing the meat all in one piece. We're going to replace the lid and dial in the stacks to make sure we're cooking along at 325 degrees. Okay, now we're going to make the sauce for the meat. Here I'm putting in 2 sticks of butter in the pan. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, a teaspoon of salt. Then we'll add 1/4 cup Dijon mustard. This is 1 cup of apple cider vinegar. Then we'll add 1 cup of tomato sauce. Your favorite brand will do. Now we need to squeeze some limes. I like how these stick together and then fall apart. Once you have 4 limes sliced, begin to squeeze them into the pan. In addition to the 4 limes, we will have 2 oranges. Squish, squish, squeeze. Squish, squish, squeeze. Squish. Okay, fast forward. On to the oranges. Squeeze these by hand. These are seedless oranges. No need to worry about filtering out the seeds. Notice the impressive show of strength of squeezing those oranges. Okay, now we're going to add about 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire. Once you have all the ingredients in the pan, we're going to set it aside. Clear off our space. That pan will go to the stove and we will reduce it by half. Here I'm placing the foil, getting ready to wrap the pork. I place the pork on the wrap. I fold up the sides a bit to create a pool. And I'm going to pour in roughly half a cup of apple cider vinegar. I just need a little moisture in the pan. Anything will do. Beer would be fine. Apple juice would be fine. Since we are making a tangy vinegar citrus sauce, I chose to use apple cider vinegar to complement the flavors. Fast forward. The pork has now finished. It was reading a temperature of 209 and the probe inserted easily into the pork. I am now placing it in the cooler to rest. Fast forward. I'm gloving up here because I am about to pull the pork by hand. It's been roughly 2 hours since the pork was put into the cooler for resting. And while it will be cooler, it will not be cool enough to the touch to pull by hand. Using cloth gloves under my rubber gloves will protect my hands while I pull the pork. Open it up. Something you did not see was earlier I pulled the pork out. I removed the skin flap and flipped the pork over into the juice in the bottom of the foil so that it may soak up and add flavor to the pork. This is me pulling the pork. There is nothing fancy here. There is no specific technique. I am picking out any pieces of gristle and any excessive pieces of fat. Some fat is okay, but you definitely want to pick out the larger chunks. At one point here, I believe I find a nice piece of tendon, which may not be pleasant to some folks, but it's kind of a delicacy for me. So tendon, straight in the mouth. Okay, we have all our pieces pulled and arranged, sized in the pan. We are going to pour the extra moisture into the pan and wrap up the bones for disposal. I'm going to cover the pork with foil while I retrieve the sauce from the kitchen. The sauce has reduced by half. As you can see, it is a lot thicker now. And we will pour this over the entire pan of pork. I'm going to pour roughly half the pan, set that aside, and while I'm still wearing my heat gloves, I'm going to mix the pork by hand. Really, I'm just trying to distribute the sauce amongst the different pieces and find any more chunks or pieces of gristle that may need to be separated. And once that is mixed, I'm going to coat the rest of the pork with the remainder of the sauce. I felt like I made a little extra sauce and I didn't wish my pork to be too saucy, so I stopped before using it all. And here is the final result. Excellent. Thank you for joining us today. If you stay tuned, we have a treat for you. I will be making chicharrons with the leftover skin. All right. Thank you for sticking around. We are going to get started on our chicharrons. Here I've pulled out the pork butt during the rest. It's cooled enough to be able to handle the skin. So as you see, I peel back the foil and I check the skin. You can see where it starts to tear as I pull it up. It is still attached to the fat. I just sampled a little piece there. It is quite delicious. It still has the flavor of the rub, so you really get that jerk spice flavor when you taste it. Here I'm using my Gunter Wilhelm slicer to remove the skin from the fat layer underneath. Once I separate it, I place the skin on the wire rack. I place it back on the smoker and wrap the butt back up to finish its rest in the cooler. Here I'm placing it back in and we will let it rest. Approximately 4 hours later, the skin has dried in the smoker and has become a leathery texture, which is exactly what we want. We want all the fat rendered from the skin. If necessary, you may need to scrape the backside of the skin with a knife. This skin I've prepared is already scraped and cleaned and ready to go. Here I have broken it into several pieces, preparing it for the fryer. Once my oil has reached 400 degrees, I will place each piece in individually, one at a time, and hold it submerged beneath the oil until it begins to pop like popcorn. See the blisters forming on the skin? Once it's completely covered, it's time to remove it from the oil and place it on paper towels to drain. Now the skin is awfully dark here, so the chicharrons themselves will appear dark. In color, they'll appear somewhat burned, but they're not actually burned. They're just smoked, which gives it that color and delicious flavor. One thing in particular that you notice is that the jerk flavor definitely comes through in the final product, and you get even the tangy notes from the vinegar that was in the wrap. Once I have removed them all individually, I lightly salt them, in this case with a little popcorn salt. And that is our finished product, ready to be eaten. They were light as air and as crispy as any pork rind or chicharron you have ever eaten. However, you do get that smoky jerk flavor, which really sets them apart from others.